A preposition is a word that helps express the relationship between two or more words in a phrase or sentence. In English, these are words like in, with, to, on, for, against, just to name a few. So for example, right now, that camera is on the tripod. The preposition on expresses the relationship between the camera and the tripod. And some of these have to do with source. For example, a source of attachment, as in on a string or stand on one foot. And B says source of dependence. For example, you can rely on me or feeds on insects. Now, these different uses of the preposition on goes all the way down to 10. That's a lot. What's more amazing is that you probably have all these different uses stored away in your head without even realizing the differences. For us who are fluent in English, we understand and use these different uses without even thinking about it. But understanding that these words, for example, this preposition on, understanding that it has a broad range of meaning can keep us from trying to understand a preposition just by its literal or root meaning. It's true that on can mean on the surface of something, but it can also mean a source of dependence, like we have here in this example. So let's take a look at how we can apply this concept to Greek. So down here, we're in John 1:1, and I've highlighted here prepositions for us, and I have one that I want to look at here, in, and the underlying Greek for this English preposition is en. Sounds very similar. Now this English preposition in is a very common translation for this Greek preposition. Now we can do a word study on this Greek preposition and see how it's translated in the ESV. We right-click, make sure we have lemma selected, and go to Bible Word Study. And we can see here that the most common translation of this Greek preposition en is in. We see that it takes up the majority of the occurrences here. But as you can kind of tell from the translations, this isn't the only way that this word is translated. Now we can see the range of meaning of this Greek preposition in the same way that we saw the range of meaning for the English preposition on. But we want to do that with the Greek dictionary, not an English dictionary. And to do that, we want to go down to this line that says Lao and has this reference here, LN 67.33. Now if we click on this, we'll open up that lexicon. Now what we want to do is under this menu, make sure we have Send Hyperlinks here. In doing so, we'll see the words listed here for this range of meaning. And you notice that there are several: kata, epi, en, ek, kathos. En was the one that we saw in John 1:1. In that verse, it has the meaning or function of a marker of a point in time which is simultaneous to or overlaps with another point in time, for example, when or at the time of. But now if we double-click on this word, en, we get to the Greek English index of this same resource. And here we have the lemma form here, en. You can see the different meanings that this word can have, referring to location, estate, extension, association, instrument, manner. So you can see that these words have a range of meanings. And because of this, you don't want to understand them just by their literal or root meaning, although it would be fine to understand it by its most common. That would be okay. But you don't want to default to what would be its literal or root meaning when there are all these other meanings that are possible. So that leaves the question, how do people decide? How do scholars go through and know that it's this meaning and, well, not that one? That comes from context. These words occur in relationship to other words, and those relationships determine the meaning and ultimately the translation. Some prepositions overlap in meaning. Take, for example, this use of the English prepositions on and in with reference to time. I leave on Tuesday versus I leave in April. Is there some special hidden meaning behind the use of on in one sentence and in the other? Not really, right? let's take a look at some of the overlap of Greek prepositions. Now, one place that you can look at the overlap between Greek prepositions is in the Lounaida lexicon. Here we are back in the ESV at John 1:1, looking at the preposition en here, which is translated in, and down here at the Lounaida line, we have the number. And at this entry, we have several Greek prepositions here: kata, epi, en, ek, and kathos. And what this entry is indicating by grouping these prepositions together is that in a certain context, each of these prepositions can function as markers of a point in time, which is simultaneous to or overlaps with another point in time, and here followed by a translation, when or at the time of. So even though this article, by grouping these prepositions together, indicates that they overlap in meaning, it's not to say that each one of these prepositions covers the same exact range of meanings. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go to the menu here and check Send Hyperlinks here. And we're going to double click on this Greek preposition here, kata, to take us to the article within Lounaida for this word. And you can begin to see the range of meaning here: down, toward, as an extension, along, throughout, facing toward. Now let's go back to that previous article and click on another one of the prepositions. Let's try epi. And scanning the article, I can't seem to find a meaning for down, as we had with kata in the previous article. And so Greek prepositions may overlap at certain points, but each one has its own different range of meanings. Now, a word of caution here. While you want to make sure that you understand maybe the subtle distinctions between prepositions, you want to make sure that you don't construct a whole doctrine that hangs on those little subtle differences. You want to make sure you're not reading into the prepositions more than actually what's there. As you learn to read and recognize Greek prepositions, you may notice them attached as prefixes to other words, especially verbs. Grammarians refer to these as prepositions in composition. So here in Ephesians 4:1, we have two examples of prepositions in composition. We have our Greek verb here, parakaleo, which is translated urge in this context. And you'll see if you have learned some prepositions, or you're starting to learn to read Greek, you'll notice that you have para here at the front before the verb kaleo. And it's the same with the next verb over here, peripateo, which in this instance, peri is the preposition and pateo would be the verb. Now because of this, because these words can be broken down in this way, it's tempting to look at them and think, kaleo means to call and para means alongside. And so somehow actually this word really means to call alongside. And even when you look up this word in the lexicon, you might even find that the entry actually tells you that this verb is a combination of two words, para and kaleo. But you want to make sure that you understand this principle. Only in certain instances do the parts of a word match the meaning to the whole. So for example, parakalo in this context doesn't mean I call alongside you, but it means I urge you. Understanding this word by its parts, if somebody were to ask you what a butterfly was, you wouldn't break down the parts of the word into two parts, as in butter and fly. Instead, you'd understand that those parts of the word function actually as a whole, and that it talks about an insect and not a piece of dairy that can travel through the air. If you're not sure, always consult your Lounaida lexicon at least for a definition. In Greek, prepositions work together with words in the dative, genitive, and accusative cases. Let's take a look at a few of these. Now, I don't want to go through every instance of every preposition, that's found in the Greek New Testament. So I've opened up this book, Learn to Read New Testament Greek, by David Allen Black. This book is not included in any of the base packages, but I'm just using it here because it has a helpful section in the appendix called Summary of Prepositions. And here at a snapshot, it shows you that prepositions work with different cases. Some prepositions here, as this heading indicates, work with one case. So here we have the Greek preposition ana, works with the accusative case with the meaning up, and so on. Anti with the genitive can mean instead of, in place of, or for. Apa with the genitive, from, away from, or of. And if we, let's just take that one as an example here. Let's go down to Ephesians 1 verse 2 in the ESV. And here we have this verse, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And here I have selected this English preposition from, and if we look down at the reverse interlinear lines here, we see that there's the English preposition. Below it is the Greek preposition that we looked at earlier, apa, and the word that follows it, theou, which is translated God, is in the genitive case. So this preposition plus its object works together as a single unit. The grammarians call this a prepositional phrase. Now let's go back up to the David Allen Black's book again, and just scrolling through this, we can see that there's another heading here that says prepositions with two cases. So for example, dia both works with the genitive and the accusative. And when used with each one of these different cases, you have a different translation. And it's the same with kata, meta, and peri. And scrolling down further, we can see that there's another heading, prepositions with three cases. And so it's saying that this Greek preposition, epi, can take its object in any one of these cases with the respective different meanings here. And here below in the ESV in Ephesians 2, 1 through 10, there's an example of two of those three cases being used with the Greek preposition epi. And it's right here in this verse that talks about God's plan to unite all things in Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. And here the Greek preposition epi is translated in the English, and it's followed by its object in the dative case, tois, uranois, which is translated heaven, both the article and the noun in the dative case. And then over here in the next occurrence of epi, we have its object in the genitive case, tes, geis, which is translated earth, and again, both the article and the noun are in the genitive case. Now, going back up to Black's book, you can see that the meaning of epi, how it's translated here, depending on the case, doesn't differ much. But you can see that here with para, the Greek preposition, there's quite a bit of difference in meaning. In a traditional course, you'd have to memorize each one of these different translations and what case it goes with each one of these prepositions. But in our case, it's good enough just to know that prepositions work with different cases. A preposition can function as an adverb, adjective, or noun. As an adverb, a preposition can modify the action of a verb. Okay, so just really quick before we look at the function of prepositions, I just want to show you how I have my visual filter set up to highlight prepositions. I've gone up to the File menu and then selected Visual Filters. And I've put this to morph because we're looking at the forms of the word. I've titled my document here Greek Prepositions. And I've left the range all passages. For resource, we're using the English Standard Version. And for morphology, we're using the Logos Greek Morphology. For parts of speech, I've just typed in this code, the @ symbol followed by a P. And for highlighting, I've chosen the double box. And here we are in Ephesians 5:2. In this verse, we have an illustration of a preposition functioning as an adverb, that is, telling us something more about the action of a verb. Verse 2 reads, "And walk in love, as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God." Have you ever taken the time to think what this phrase actually means, walk in love? Should we take this English preposition in its literal or most common meaning, which indicates position or location? Well, if we did, that might not make a whole lot of sense. Is love really something that can be walked in, like somebody walks through a field? Well, if not, how would you know? Well, in this video, I want to point you to a couple of resources that you can use to help you figure out how a preposition is functioning. But right off the bat, we can see that love isn't actually a location, nor is it a physical entity. Instead, it seems as though this prepositional phrase, in love, is telling us something about this verb here, walk. And we might even think that since the verb here is walk, that we are talking about a location. But in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and New Testament, halak in Hebrew and peripateo in Greek are used to mean live. And you could see that if you go down here to the Laonida line and hover over the number here. You can see that the Greek word peripateo is defined as to live or behave in a customary manner with possible focus upon continuity of action. The translations go to live, to behave, to go about doing. Now, because peripateo can be translated to live or behave, you're going to see other Bible translations with that rendering. You can see here ESV has walk, NRSV has live, KJV and NKJV both have walk, and the NIV and NLT both have live. But now, going back to the function of that preposition in this context, I want to just show you a couple of different resources you can use to determine how this preposition is being used. The first place that you can go to is the Laonida number in the reverse interlinear pane. And if you hover over here, you can see that the Greek preposition, en, is defined as a marker of the manner in which an event occurs. In other words, it's talking about how the action of the verb is accomplished. And you can see an example there in the pop-up from Romans 12:8. The one who shares with others should do so with generosity. So there it's talking about how somebody shares. In this verse, Ephesians 5:2, how should we walk? Or how are we commanded to walk? We're commanded to walk lovingly. Or to put it another way, we're commanded to live lovingly. So the Laonida number in the reverse interlinear pane is one place you can go to. Another place is the Cascadia syntax graphs. In this visual representation, we see that the preposition here, en, which is translated in, followed by its object, agape, love, they have an adverbial function. And here we have a slightly different definition than what we have in the Laonida lexicon. But this points to a unit that represents the when, where, how, or why of a proposition. So the Laonida number indicated manner, which is an adverbial function. The Cascadia syntax graph labels it an adverbial function. And we want to look at one other resource here, the Lexem Syntactic Greek New Testament. And here we find the syntactic force to be that of either a preposition of location or a preposition of manner, which is defined as use of a preposition to express either method or manner. So these are a few of the resources you can go to determine the function of a preposition. You can go to the text comparison, Syntactic Greek New Testament, as well as the syntax graphs, and look at your Laonida number. So what can you do with this in a sermon? Well, your audience may find it helpful for you to just rephrase this command, say, live in a loving manner, or at the very least, you can make mention that this phrase here is talking about the manner in which we walk or live. Paul doesn't leave us to define love for ourselves. It's more than just a feeling or the warm fuzzies or something. Paul makes a comparison here. So how are we to live? We're to live in love, in a loving way. What does that mean? It's as Christ loved us. And even more specifically, that love called for an action. He gave himself up for us. And his example shows us what it means to truly walk in love. As an adjective, a preposition can modify a noun or pronoun. In Matthew 3:17, we have an example of a preposition modifying a noun. This verse comes out of the story of Jesus' baptism, and it reads, "And behold, a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.'" And the English preposition here, from, is a translation of the Greek preposition, ek, which takes its object in the genitive case. As you can see here, heaven is translated from ton, uranon. Both the article and the noun are in the genitive case. Now, one of the first places you can go to get some more information on the use of a preposition in a certain context, you can go to the Lounnida number in the reverse interlinear pane. And here we have some information, ek, the preposition, and it notes that it works with the genitive, and it gives this definition: a marker of the source of an activity or state with the implication of something proceeding from or out of the source, with the translation from and by. So the question comes up, so what? Is there significance to this? Well, if you look at the text comparison, you'll see that every one of the translations here has the same rendering of the preposition. From heaven, from heaven, from heaven again, and on down. But just because there's not a difference in translations doesn't mean there isn't significance here. If we go back to the ESV and think about heaven as the source for this voice, we have to ask the question, who in the Bible speaks from heaven? Now the answer seems pretty obvious. God does. But in this context, it's significant because Jesus and the other people weren't hearing voices. The description that this voice came from heaven gives weight to the quotation, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." It wasn't like another human being said this to Jesus. It was God who said this to Jesus. And therefore, unlike many other false messiahs in the first century who appointed themselves or were appointed by other human beings, Jesus is appointed by God himself.